Oh, sister, you are so kind.
Oh, so
Oh, my God.
Is the meeting starting yet?
Yes, it has. It has. Please stay muted.
I can't hear anything.
The Zoom session hasn't started yet. We're just having a PowerPoint presentation. It will start shortly.
All right, because I'm on the phone.
Could you make sure you're muted though?
Sure.
So we don't get any audio feedback. Thank you.
That's right, that's fine. Thank you.
Welcome viewers to the online commemoration of the 166th Eureka Rebellion anniversary. My name is Derek Burke and I will be hosting this online session. On this day, the 29th of November 1854, the Eureka rebels took the famous Eureka Oath. Part of this oath is incorporated into this year's theme for the commemoration, namely, in the midst of a global crisis, it is right to rebel for our rights and liberties. Now, if viewers do not want their face to be seen on this Zoom forum, could you turn off your camera by clicking on the stop video icon on the bottom left corner of your screen. First up, I would like to ask Kevin Bracken, Chairperson of Spirit Eureka, who will do acknowledgement and recognition of country. Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, Derek. I welcome everyone to our Spirit of Eureka anniversary. This is a bit different this year as it's being held online, and I want to thank Pat Donoghue for all the technical work he's done and the registrations to make this happen. The advantage of having this online is that people from all over Australia can join in, but wherever you are, we acknowledge that the original custodians of this land, sovereignty has never been ceded. I'm on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I acknowledge that Australia has unfinished business with its First Nations people. Spirit of Eureka actively seeks to promote a vision and a pathway to a democratic and independent Australia which values all its citizens and is a fair and just society for all. We support and promote this vision through activities, education, research, and the recognition of significant contributions and achievements. We draw our inspiration from the fight for justice, democracy, and a fair go for all that was born in the Eureka Stockade Rebellion in 1854, which united more than 20 nationalities under the Eureka flag. The Eureka flag embodies the spirit of Australia's multiculturalism. It has become a national symbol for all who fight for justice, unity, an egalitarian society, and the vision of an independent and fair Australia. The Eureka movement also helped give birth to the Australian Union movement. It was only 2 years after the Eureka, the building workers in Melbourne won an 8 hours a day. As a result of winning the 8 hour day, it started the 8 hour day movement that swept throughout the world. The Spirit of Eureka has adopted the Eureka spirit and its flag as the inspiration for all its endeavours. We hope you enjoy our anniversary celebration, and we hope it inspires you to take a more active role in making this country and our world a more decent place to live. I'll just pass back to Derek, who'll introduce our first speaker.
Okay. Pat, can we go back to me now, please? Okay. I personally speak to you today from the stolen land of the Kaurna people in South Australia. The program for this forum will be in 6 parts. First, housekeeping for how this forum will operate. Second, there'll be 4 guest speakers. That'll be approximately 60 minutes. The third is the presentation of the Spirit of Eureka Award to Bernard Collaery. Fourth, there'll be a question and answer time. That'll be approximately 20 minutes. Fifth is the reciting of the Eureka Oath, and everyone is invited to join in. Sixth and lastly is announcements of the future events that Spirit of Eureka will focus on in 2021. This Eureka anniversary online commemoration and forum comes on the heels of a number of global crises that confront us today. Spirit of Eureka believes the best way to acknowledge the historic struggle of Eureka is to analyse, examine and discuss with our viewers the current global crises that confronts not only Australia but also the world. Spirit of Eureka endeavours to continue the fighting spirit of the Eureka rebels for a just, democratic and independent Australia. That is the purpose of today's forum, which our 4 guest speakers will address for us. The combination of the COVID-19 pandemic, the continuing economic collapse and attacks on workers' rights, the militarisation of our society and the erosion of our hard-won democratic rights, the ever-present threat of war and the escalating climate catastrophe have detonated the global crisis that we have all witnessed recently, especially this year, 2020. These and other issues, which I'm sure our speakers will cover in detail and provide us with useful insights that offer answers to these critical issues. Now, as you can see on the screen, Raffaello Carboni's appeal, which he stirringly called out to the Eureka rebels, irrespective of nationality, religion or colour, to select the Southern Cross as a refuge of all the oppressed from all countries on earth, is a potent reminder of the need for unity and solidarity that is surely required in these times of crisis. Now to housekeeping. Could you take that Carboni call off now, please, Pat? Thank you. Now to housekeeping. Could viewers please mute your mics so there's no audio interruption? Please use the speaker view, not gallery view. That way you'll be able to see who's speaking at all times. If you have any questions for our speakers, type them in the chat column and don't forget to press enter so they can be received. If you're viewing this online forum via Facebook, you can also type your questions there. The viewers' questions will be put to the speakers at the end of all the presentations. If you would like to make any comments about this forum, please type them also in the chat column towards the end of the forum. Now on to the speakers. We've invited 4 speakers for this online event. They are Alison Broinowski, Christy Cain, Charlie Joyce, and Bernard Collaery. Our speakers have been allotted 15 minutes each to deliver their presentation. The first speaker is Alison Broinowski. Alison is a former diplomat and Vice President of the Australian Powers Reform and a democratic human rights activist. Thanks, Alison. Over to you.
Thank you. And it's a delight to be here. Thank you, Shirley, and your team for putting this together. And congratulations to the Spirit of Eureka for its 166th year. That is really something. And when I saw how old you are and how long ago it is that Eureka took place, it made me think of the 175 years that Julian Assange faces in prison if he is extradited to the United States and gets the full sentence that they intend. Just think about it. Older than Eureka. That makes me think, in turn, about unjust, undemocratic, and lacking in independence. How unjust we are, how undemocratic we are, and how still, after these many years, lacking independence we are. Unjust because of the way many things, but in particular, because of the way we have allowed our governments to impose 83 different pieces of security legislation on us since 2001. Arguably, it has made very few of us safer, and it's endangered an awful lot more of us. We're in danger of having our houses and offices raided at any time, as you have seen, our documents taken, our computers hacked, smashed up, and hard drives removed. For what? Because somebody wants to prove that they've got the power and they want to prove that they're prepared to use it in the name of national security. Actually, it's not the security of our nation that they're talking about. It's the security and secrecy of the government that they are defending. And we are the people who are becoming the fall guys in that fight. Secondly, are we undemocratic? This is a rude shock for most Australians to suggest that we are. And yet, there can hardly be anything less democratic than the way Australia goes to war. We, in Australia, under our Constitution, send troops to war on the whim of a Prime Minister of the day who simply tells the National Security Committee of Cabinet what he intends, it's always a he, always intends what he intends to do, and when the troops are leaving and where they're going. There is no debate in the Parliament that asks why, what for, how long is it going to last, what's it going to cost, what's it going to achieve? Nothing. No vote. So we in Australians for War Powers Reform want to change that because it is inherently, as I said, undemocratic. And the only way for us to stop the kinds of atrocities that we have seen revealed by the Brereton inquiry is for there to be democratic responsibility through our elected members back to their electors, so that if every member of the House and the Senate has to vote on a motion to go to war, it might still happen. They might approve it, and that can happen. But they then, if it goes badly, they go back to their electorate, and their electorate said, you voted for that. This is a disaster. What'd you do that for? And that is a very democratic message to send to our elected representatives. And I can tell you that they wouldn't vote for them nearly as readily as they do at the moment for a succession of disastrous wars. Just to remind you, all of our wars since 1945, apart from the British with the Malayan emergency, all of our wars have been American wars, chosen for us by the United States. We went to them because the United States said we ought to, they wanted us to, and we said, no problem, we will. And we haven't won one. Now, this is a bad look. If you're investing a lot of money in something, let alone people's lives, you want it to work, don't you? They have not worked. They haven't achieved anything except a lot of pain and suffering for a lot of people, not only Australians, but for the people we fought against and many others besides. And a whole waste of money, enterprise, environment, every other possible consequence you can think of. So an end to that, unless the people of Australia democratically decide that we need it. And thirdly, independent. So you've got unjust, undemocratic, and lacking independence. Well, of course, because that follows from what I've just said about the American alliance. And ever since 1945, the Australian government, many governments, have conned the people into believing that the Americans were committed by the ANZUS Treaty to defend us. They're not. We're not committed to defend them either. Not at all. John Howard lied when he said that we must fight the war on terror with the United States anywhere and everywhere in the world. That was not what the ANZUS Treaty said. The ANZUS Treaty talks about a threat to one of the countries in the Pacific area only. And then, even then, all we agree to do is consult each other about that in accordance with our constitutional processes. The Americans put that in because they want to be able to say no to Australia. They didn't want to fight to defend Australia. They still don't want to fight to defend Australia. And if it became a matter of, say, Indonesia or China and Australia wanting defense, I can tell you, we would have a hard time getting it. And even if we got it, it wouldn't be the success that many people might suppose, because such a war, particularly with China, could rapidly turn into a nuclear one. Such a war could rapidly turn into unilateral attacks by China on American bases on Australian soil, which in their turn are another example of our lack of independence. Only countries lacking independence have foreign military installations on their territory. And we have. And we're increasing them. And we're building them and adding more. Why? Because Kim Beazley and people who believe that the American alliance will defend us think that the only way to ensure that is to ensure that they will defend a base, because they've got a vested interest in the base. Not the whole of Australia, no way. They've got a vested interest in the base, and that is what they would defend. Well, I wouldn't want to be in Australia when that situation manifests itself. So all of that leads us in war powers reform, and I think IPAN agrees with us on this, and it follows too from the spirit of Eureka that we have to change the way we go to war, preferably stop going to war altogether. And as a diplomat, I would say, don't have the war, have the conference, get over it, talk to each other. We are talking to our neighbors less now than we did when I was working for Foreign Affairs. Less. We are not consulting our neighbors about important decisions of this sort. And then finally, that leads us to Brereton and his revelations about the awful things that have been happening for years under the nose of many military commanders who were there and who are now in positions of prominence. And if they didn't know, they should have known. And if they didn't know when they were there, they shouldn't have been there. So I'm not blaming, I am blaming the people who did war crimes, but I'm not blaming the military itself. What I'm blaming is Australia for allowing the way we go to war to be so sloppy, for there to be soldiers in the field who have no idea why they're there, who the enemy are, or why they're fighting them, and what would represent a successful outcome. They have no idea. And consequently, what you get is bad behavior, because they're without a proper motive. They're without a proper strategy because they don't know what they're trying to achieve. They're just trying to be there until they're told to come home. Now, for a so-called independent country, that's a pretty pathetic record. And I believe, and I think that people in the spirit of Eureka believe that this has to change and that it's right to fight to change it. Thank you.
Derek, you're muted.
I muted myself. Okay, we're getting some comments that people are getting audio feedback, so could people make sure they are muted? Thank you, Alison, for your persuasive coverage on a range of issues such as national security, war powers, civil liberties and democratic rights. Really appreciate it. The second speaker is Christy Cain. Chris has been the Secretary of the West Australian branch of the Maritime Union of Australia since 2003, during which time it has grown to be the largest MUA branch. He is highly regarded in the Australian Union movement and is currently the National President of the MUA. Thanks, Chris. Over to you.
Thanks, Derek. And firstly, I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land, their elders, their past and present. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I also want to congratulate all of you guys here today, and in respect to being very humble but honoured to speak on this worthwhile occasion. 166 years of the anniversary of the Eureka Rebellion, and I'd like to try to put across to you today what my view is where the union movement in Australia and internationally should be going, and where we find ourselves at the moment. I'll start by saying no longer do we have 50–60% union density, regardless of where you look. And we can look in our own smaller sphere, where, on the waterfront we would be. Well, over here where we would be 98, and across the country, 98–99% density in the union. But when we look at the union movement and how they're faring, and I've just been elected on the ACTU, I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, by the way. I sat there for 7 hours on a Zoom meeting, never said a word. And I have my own criticism of, I know it's live this, but I do have criticisms of how these meetings are progressing there. For a number of reasons. We have, as I've said, we must be down to anywhere around about 8% of workers in Australia being in the union. In the private sector and the public sector, maybe a little bit more. So that tells me a number of things. What are we doing wrong? What have we got wrong from years previous to where we are now? Because the laws in its sense are the same, whether we say it or not. People were still getting fined, people were still going to jail, people were getting locked up for having meetings. At one stage, there was legislation many years ago, it was 3 on a corner, and it was the Dog Collar Act, and you'd be put away. And there's no different to what there is now. What I think we lack is a number of things. Leadership. We've relied too long on the ALP to so-called fix our issues for us. And we've actually allowed the ALP to take control of many unions and many unions' leadership, which I think is disgusting. Our own union, now with the super union, we expected when we joined from the maritime sector, a different union altogether. We want to be a campaigning union. We want to be industrial focused. We want to be progressive, organised, and last but not least, a very militant organisation. If you consider the union when it came together, from the miners to the manufacturing to the maritime shipping, offshore oil and gas, and then to the waterfront, right across them sectors, the logistical chain would have the ability to use its organisational skills and power to help workers right across any sector in this country. And sadly, we have our differences. It's only early days. There's teething problems going around in our organisation. There's things being said that shouldn't be said. There's things being leaked that shouldn't be leaked. But hopefully in the new year, you're going to see a more progressive union and a more activated union in respect to what we do in our own organisation. And hopefully that will rub off to some of the other unions that I see are just ALP hacks that do nothing, don't participate, have took up this American style of unionism to the extent they don't even see their membership, they don't answer phone calls, they don't give their mobiles out. I've heard some terrible things, and this is the way, why I'm saying this, it needs to be put out there so that we have to make our minds up what we're going to be and where we're going in the next 10 or 20 years in this country as far as trade unionism and as far as activism is concerned. We are seeing massive wage theft to the extent never been seen before. We're seeing privatisation, casualisation. We're seeing the government, we're seeing workers now being sued individually. And we're seeing unions being massive fines for demonstrating in respect to their EBAs, even when it's protected action. We're getting called up for the things that we normally would take for granted that we could do. What's the answer to all that? Well, I don't think the ALP is the answer. I've had my involvement at a very high level in the ALP from a rank and file point of view. And I have problems with them in respect to how they go forward. And once a policy is moved on a platform, I believe they should stick to that platform. And yet over here in West Australia, you would have seen on the social media, we have a massive dispute with the Labour government that wants to get rid of Fremantle Port, build an outer harbour, privatise Fremantle Port, and give greedy business developers the ability to put high-rise ghettos, what I call ghettos, in a port that's been there for 130 years, fully unionised, 100% union, 100% EBAs and negotiated outcomes, probably, if not the best in the world or in this country, along with other ports in respect to wages and conditions that we have and enjoy around this country. You're seeing what's gone on. I mean, we had the last port, container terminal port in this country that hasn't been privatised. And we see it again, once again, being done by a Labour government. It's just disgusting and it needs to be fought. We see, and not only one company now, they're all coming out. I've just been on a picket line there on Friday with a mob, you may have heard, I'm sure you have, a mob called Serco. Now, Serco are known all throughout the world of what they do in respect to wage theft, what they do to make people casual, what they do to sack people and bully people, and obviously get rid of wages and conditions. And here again, we see long-term, massive contracts being given out to multinational companies like this that destroy working class wages and conditions. So we, along with a number of other unions, was on the hospital, and we're seeing it again. Hospitals, you know, what they are doing, Serco, is undermining. My view, the hospitals should come back in-house and should be nationalised, and workers should be more workers should be put on permanent, real jobs. And there we're seeing wage theft, but not only wage theft at the highest level, multinational companies coming in here, reaping the benefits and robbing workers and robbing this country. We've seen Chevron, BHP, Rio Tinto, Shell, all of them. We've had fights with all of them, you know, especially all these mobs that are making billions of dollars, Gina Reinhardt and Twiggy Forrest, all of them, who have made billions and billions of dollars of our wealth, every Australian. And by the way, Fremantle Port makes $100 million a year. It's owned by the workers of West Australia and the government. And they want to get rid of it, outsource it, and give it all that land to big business to develop, as I say, we call them ghettos over here. And furthermore, get rid of a fully 100% unionised workforce and automate that workforce into robots, into an outer harbour. It is an absolute disgrace and it's disgusting. How do we move forward? Well, we're going to fight, and we're used to it here. I don't think there's an employer in my 40 years as a trade unionist, but 20 as a, coming up for 20 years as an official, that we haven't had a dispute with. You know, people tend to think through COVID, there's no disputes going on. You would go and have a look at the waterfront, go and look at VICT, go and look at DP World, look at Patrick's, look at Cube, look at Lynx. Everywhere around the waterfront, DP World, we've been in dispute with them over here for 2.5 years, 2 years. Now we're taking strike action here again, every week, 24 hours, overtime bans and everything else to get what we actually, not only to get anything, but to keep what we've got. 2 years we've been at it. Chevron, when we had the blue with Chevron, that was a 6-year blue, and they wanted $100 million off us in the courts. VICT, they're suing the union for $80 million. They sued the international, the ILWU for $100 million for the same argument what we're having down there in Victoria. And that is the right for wharfies to earn decent wages and conditions that's been fought for over years and years and years. In all the ports around this country. They came in, Filipino, Indonesian gangsters, got agreements off the government to move there and to undercut all the wages and conditions and have it as a scab port. There's no disrespect to that. We're up for contempt charges, myself and the Assistant National Secretary. But one bit of good news I am having is we went from 2 members in there when we couldn't get in, and we're now got a density of 97%. We're now going to protected action ballots with them in VICT, and we've worked really hard over the last 2 years to let workers understand where we're coming from, where we're going to, and watch the space next year. But I believe we'll have a great outcome for them workers in there. We'll take them to the ballot, and it'll be up to them members to get on with it and put the strike action on, because they deserve. And obviously, we're not going to let go the wages and conditions that we all enjoy. A way forward, I'd like a round table, not with politicians in there, with unions. You know, let's have a meeting in a central position, say Melbourne, and let's get, you know, views from all the rank and file delegates around this country. Let's all converge in an area and have a debate on how we want to go forward. Let's not just go and give the ALP millions and millions of dollars and then get nothing for it. We just don't believe we should be doing that anymore. There should be a Magna Carta written. There should be the heads of the political parties sign up to that Magna Carta, so that it should be announced well before we go and give them money to squander and to pillage out of us and then do nothing when they get there. It's my view, I don't believe Albanese is going to be there in leading into the next election. I might be wrong. I don't know. But that's my own personal view. I don't think he will be. And something may go on The way you're seeing, they couldn't organise a piss up in a brewery, to be honest, at the moment. So excuse the language, but I don't think they could. The CFMMEU is a solid union. As much as what you read in the press about the discontent in certain divisions, we are not. We have our internal differences, and the one thing I don't like is it being ahead across the waterfront and across the construction divisions and the mining and the manufacturing, that because one person has resigned, the union's a gang of rabble, we're all bullies. How often do you hear that? You know, we've been raided that many times, as you've seen. You know, the AWU have been raided, we've been raided again last week, and there's nothing there. It was all about taking the stigma off the Premier in New South Wales, who, as you know, for the last 5 years was with a gentleman. And no one's going to tell me he wasn't telling her anything of what was going on and the millions and millions of dollars that they were siphoning off in respect to what was going on. She just didn't know about it. Come on, really. So look, there's lots of things to take the pressure off them. And what do? They go and bash unions all around this country and all around the world, and we'll continue to see that if I'm any judge. I've been on for a bit long. I could talk for a hell of a lot on where we should go and what we should do, but I do believe that you're going to see a new CFMMEU, a campaigning union, a militant union, a progressive union that will stand in the trenches with like-minded unions, and we'll be at the forefront for many battles to come, and we're very proud to be at the forefront. I also want to congratulate, obviously, everyone here, Shirley, Pat, Derek, Alison, Kevin, all the organisers of this. It's fantastic to talk to like-minded people who have a vision that workers need to be represented properly wherever you are and around the world. And I think we play our part, especially the Maritime Division, around the world in what we do to help workers in every country. And even in this country where we've held ships up, it's not out there in the media, we've held ships up safety-wise, to make sure seafarers get paid, to make sure seafarers get home, to make sure they get off a ship after being on that ship, as if they were in a floating prison for 14 months straight. So we've got a lot, and we make the ship owners pay for their repatriation back to them countries where they come from, and pay their wages in back pay. So it's never ever mentioned enough. This union that we have formed is a great union. It will be leading the way, and we want to be involved in people like yourselves. It's just fantastic to be here and listen, obviously to the previous speaker, and to get your views on how we should be going forward. So once again, I congratulate you all. I wish you well. And when I'm over in Melbourne or wherever I am, I will always give a plug in respect to this forum and to all you guys, brothers and sisters. So once again, thanks a lot, and thanks for having me down here today. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you, Chris, for that. The union movement is a really important part of the struggle for a just, democratic and independent Australia. The MUA has always been in the forefront. They are a great union. Thank you, Chris. The third speaker is Charlie Joyce. Charlie is a member of Spirit of Eureka and a Melbourne University Union student activist. Thanks, Charlie. Over to you.
Thanks, H. Derek. Good day, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here today. I feel really lucky to be able to represent Spirit of Eureka in such a terrific event. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm calling in from the unceded lands of the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and to any First Nations people who are here today. I'd also like to extend, both personally and on behalf of Spirit of Eureka, unconditional solidarity with the struggle of First Nations people from around this country who are struggling for justice, for decolonisation, for self-determination. The goal of Spirit of Eureka, which is to fight for a just, a sovereign and a democratic Australia, is intrinsically connected with the First Nations struggle. So first off, I'm sure I speak on behalf of spirit of Eureka when I say thank you all once again for joining us today. We celebrate and mark the 166th anniversary of the Eureka Rebellion. Though it's sad that the coronavirus pandemic has meant that we haven't been able to do this event in person, I think we're really lucky that these new circumstances mean that we can be joined by, comrades and friends like Christy from Western Australia and from others from all over the country and maybe even internationally as well. So, some silver linings as well. I'd like to also thank our terrific previous speakers. It's really inspiring and remarkable words from both of you. I think they've all given us so much to think about and have really called us to action going forward. And we're lucky to have such dedicated people carrying on the progressive and the democratic movement in this country. So this afternoon, I'd like to reflect on the last year. I think it's been, we can all agree, one of the most memorable and eventful years in recent history, and the world has faced a series of distinct but highly connected crises that we wanted to talk about in this forum today. So today I'd like to speak on the crises, talk about what they've shown, and reflect on what they mean for us who are seeking to carry on the legacy and the spirit of Eureka, the spirit of the Eureka Rebellion into the 2020s and beyond. So the first crisis, which I think is probably the most obvious, is the reason we can't hold this event in person, the coronavirus pandemic. And I think what this pandemic has really done is it's rudely pulled back the curtains and shown us all the true colours of our leaders, of our governments, of our societies in general. It's shown us the fatal danger of this ideologically neoliberal capitalist model, which has caused these pressing conditions of casualised and precarious labour all over the world, as well as under-resourced, privatised healthcare systems in much of the world. That's been really significant in causing the worst outcomes of this pandemic. I mean, here in Victoria, only weeks ago, and only weeks ago in South Australia, we saw the dangers that outsourced casualised labour can pose. In both states, COVID-19 got out into the community because of this. And thankfully, not so much here, but across much of the world, especially in the United States, we've seen the dangers of an underfunded for-profit healthcare system where the majority of the population can't even afford to go to the doctor. For-profit drug and healthcare corporations make record profits while thousands of Americans die daily, and the US government refuses to step in and fundamentally change anything. So thankfully, our public health system is not that far gone here, and we have been quite successful in containing the virus, but I think we can also take lessons from our experience of the pandemic as well. Again, here in Victoria, sorry if I'm a little bit biased in my coverage, at pretty much every instance where the Andrews government needed to lock down or contain people, this was pretty much undertaken solely by police, by armed police. Think back to the lockdown of the public housing towers only a few months ago. It struck me at the time when that happened that this reflexive use of police forces to carry out public health control was not even a choice by the state government per se. It wasn't even a debated thing. Rather, it was, at this point, police forces are pretty much the only means that governments have to reliably mobilise large amounts of trained people to carry out control measures like this. Any other alternatives have been long privatised and defunded or never existed in the first place. So we've got a situation where if the state government needs to lock down a public housing tower of poor and working class people, many from migrant and refugee backgrounds, the only means they have to do it is with an organisation that is armed, that's got a track record of severe mistreatment to many sections of the community, especially Indigenous people, migrants and disabled people. So I think this should really worry us. And additionally, police forces have emerged from this pandemic with more funding and more legal power. This will not be taken away from them anytime soon, I'm pretty sure. And already these new powers are being used to break up climate protests in Victoria or student education protests in New South Wales. And no doubt they may be soon also used on picket lines and things like that as well. this should also really, really worry us. And as police forces with extra powers crack down on protests and democratic rights, we must remember in the spirit of this event today that it was the Victoria Police in the nascent early days that joined with the British Army in storming the Eureka Stockade 166 years ago, leading to the deaths of up to 60 miners. Some things change, some things stay the same. I'd like to now talk about a second crisis from this year, the global economic crisis that's brought about as the coronavirus pandemic finally kicked over the financial and economic house of cards, I guess, that had been like shoddily built up in the 13 years since the last economic crisis. A combination of the economic downturn with the public health lockdown created a situation where nearly overnight, hundreds of thousands of jobs that were mostly casualised disappeared, and hundreds of thousands of workers were suddenly unemployed. The federal government, granted under massive pressure from the unions and from the community, thankfully implemented the JobKeeper and the JobSeeker payments, keeping millions of people out of poverty. But somehow it took a global pandemic for the Australian government to think that maybe unemployed people should be above the poverty line. But the coalition government wants to make sure that we don't get used to it. Their mates in big business, but also probably in small business as well, know that without the threat of poverty, they won't be able to continue to get away with paying their workers as low as possible wages on casual contracts. And so in the coming months, they're going to be working to cut this support. They already have. So for those of us that have the apparently extreme and radical political position that in a country as wealthy as ours, people should probably not live in poverty, we're going to need to fight this. And that's why Spirit of Eureka is really proud to endorse and support the LIFE campaign, which is calling for living incomes for everyone. It's so important that we bring together a broad coalition of trade unions, of community groups, political parties, social movements to push for proper unemployment support. And it's really good that the LIFE campaign is setting to be the beginning of that. The economic crisis in combination with the pandemic has also had has especially had a really severe damaging effect on my area of focus in most of my life, higher education in this country. For about the last 18 months, I've been one of the elected education officers at the University of Melbourne Student Union, and it's been really disgraceful and tragic to see and experience firsthand what this crisis has done to universities. Across the country, the rapid loss of international student revenue really spooked university managements who've spent the last 30 years since the removal of free education obsessing over their financial situations and revenue margins, to the point now where at Melbourne Uni in particular, 72% of employees are employed on casual contracts, and many of them are experiencing the same wage theft and the same underpayment and poor conditions that you get across the rest of the economy. And so it's when this crisis hit, they quickly moved to make up for the lost revenue by laying off tens of thousands of staff members across the country who, like I was saying, were mostly casualised and they were mostly underpaid. But when it emerged that the financial situations were often not as bad as they thought they were going to be, the uni management still decided to use this opportunity to cut back on costs and implement business-minded restructures. Never let a good crisis go to waste. But the real culprits of what we've seen, the crisis that we've seen in the university sector, are the federal government. At first, for no reason other than what appeared to be an ideological hatred of public education, they refused to extend JobKeeper to public universities, but gave it to private ones. And that led to the university sector literally being decimated. Tens of thousands, if not more, jobs were lost. And then, without arrest, they pushed through the incredibly unpopular and damaging Job Ready Bill, which doubled the cost of some degrees. We fought pretty hard to fight it, but as I'm sure many of my comrades can attest to, it's hard to bring down the government when you're not allowed to leave your house for more than 60 minutes a day. But while it's very damaging, very, very different circumstances, it struck me that in a way, that the way that the government is charging tens of thousands of dollars for a qualification that is necessary, in many parts of the economy to get by. It's not dissimilar from the 166 years ago, the colonial governments, the colonial authorities charging for an arbitrary mining license. You know, in both occasions, governments are seeking to impose additional barriers to those just trying to get by, seeking to shackle people with debt before they've even struck out. You know, moreover, they're making revenues from by these methods, rather than taxing the wealthiest in our society. You know, as I was saying, some things change and some things stay the same. We're also seeing the government, as conservative governments always do in an economic crisis, renew their assault on the trade union movement. I think Christy's already gone a bit into this, so I won't go into it too much as well, but I think it's so important that we continue to fight to maintain and to extend workers' rights and conditions in this country. Spirit of Eureka will certainly be focusing on this in the coming months. And, you know, indeed, we must remember that in another economic crisis, in the crisis of the 1890s, the Eureka flag was flown famously by the trade union movement in the shearers and the miners' strikes of 1890 and 91, when union rights were again under attack. So there's a long tradition that I think we're all the custodians of today. There are many other crises that we could talk about today, and that have already been talked about by our terrific guest speakers. You know, militarism and imperialism, surveillance, the climate and the ecological crises, the list goes on. But I think I'd like to talk about a third global crisis, which I think really defined this year, and that's the international uprising and the movement against racism and against police violence. This global movement, which exploded in the United States in the middle of the year following the unforgivable public execution of George Floyd, rapidly spread around the world, from London, UK, to Lagos in Nigeria, to Sao Paulo, Brazil, to here in Melbourne. And I think it really terrified the powers that be. You know, you can't forget that image of the burning Minneapolis police station on one of those first nights out, and it really reminds you, you know, just as the raising of the Eureka flag 166 years ago on Bakery Hill, it's an unforgettable symbol to the world of the fragility of the forces that bind us and the power of ordinary people to overcome them. And in Melbourne, we saw that when tens of thousands of people braved both winter rain and government threats and a pandemic to take to the streets and demand an end to the disgraceful Indigenous deaths in custody. It was an inspiring sight of solidarity and resistance where those of Indigenous and non-Indigenous heritage came together to fight the ongoing legacy of colonialism. And, you know, similarly, another sight of inspiring solidarity went across the west coast of North America on the June 19th anniversary of the emancipation of slaves in the US. Members of the International Longshoremen and Warehouse Union went out on strike in unity with the protests, calling for the bringing together of the union movements and the social movements. And I really think that model of social movement unionism is the future for solving our interconnected crises that we face. You know, with the construction green bans and the many maritime strikes in solidarity with South Africa and with the Indonesian independence movement and many more instances, this country, our country, was famous for this sort of unionism at one stage. I think returning, as Christy Cain says, start to reconceptualize the union movement going forward, we need to think about returning to this inspiring tradition. It will be so essential for dealing with the multitude of crises that we face. I won't go on for much longer. So just to wrap up, I think it's really easy to get overwhelmed by the massive scale of any one of these crises that you know, myself or any of the other speakers have spoken on tonight, let alone all of them combined. I know I do. But when the Spirit of Eureka Committee were planning the themes for this event this afternoon, we settled on 5 points that we thought would be good themes for the event. You may have seen them on the posters. And those were that it is right to fight government attacks on people's democratic rights, for workers' rights and jobs, for proper funding of public health and aged care, It's right to fight for a just economic system and to end imperialist wars. And it's right to fight for climate justice and for a healthy environment. And we've talked a lot about these themes tonight, about their causes and why we need to fight for something better. But I think we often lose track of the fact, and it's easy to, but that it's possible to win some of these things. And I was really inspired recently by the successful restoration of democracy to Bolivia, where a trade union, a farmer, indigenous and social movements combined to defeat an authoritarian right-wing regime that had been backed by US empire and by the elites of that country. It seemed a year ago when their president, who was a union leader, Evo Morales, first indigenous president in the history of Bolivia, when he had to flee the country after a military coup that was American-backed, that empire had won again. You know, that it's just another line and another defeat. But a year later, the democratic process of change in Bolivia has resumed and the people are back in power and they're stronger than ever. Their defeat ultimately paved the way for an even stronger victory and an even strengthening and a deepening of their democratic process. And 166 years ago, though the Eureka rebels were defeated, less than 2 years later, universal male suffrage was legislated in the Victorian Parliament. The goals of the Ballarat Reform League, the predecessor to the Eureka rebels, had been won. Their defeat as well ultimately paved the way for an even stronger victory. So, we must not become dejected in the face of these multitude of crises. We must take inspiration from the struggles of so many, from the Eureka Rebellion 166 years ago, the spirit we try to keep on, from the massive worker strikes of the 1890s, from the struggles of Indigenous and people of colour all over the world, and in this country especially, for an end to police violence, an end to racism and to colonial oppression, from the university staff fighting against capitalisation, for the wharfies in Perth fighting against the privatising of the ports, from students standing against police violence to fight for public education, from the green bans and the strikes of international solidarity, from the victorious Bolivian struggle to regain their democracy. Our movement against injustice is strong, it's rich, it's international, it's intergenerational, and it will win. It must win. So with this in mind, we will continue to carry on the spirit of Eureka, and it's so great to see so many amazing people here today and listening in from Facebook. And we'll continue to fight for a just and independent and democratic Australia. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Charlie. You got a big applause there, I can see. You covered a lot of territory with some excellent insights and reflections on history and the current political climate. Thanks again, Charlie. We have Bernard Collaery to speak next. He's a late inclusion to our panel of speakers, and we are so grateful to have him at this forum. Bernard has now become one of Australia's most famous lawyers who has been prosecuted in a secret trial by the Australian government for exposing the Australian Secret Intelligence Services bugging the East Timorese government during negotiations over East Timor Sea oil. Before he speaks, there's an opportune time now to present Bernard with the 2020 Spirit of Eureka Award. He will receive a framed print of the famous Eureka Oath painting by Charles Doudiet. Could we show the picture of this painting on screen share, please? Pat's just looking for it. There it is. It's a wonderful painting and painted at the same time in 1854. Okay. Right, thank you, Pat. You can take it down again. Okay, I'll hand now I'll hand over to Kevin Bracken, who will present Bernard with this award. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Derek. When espionage is used to advantage a multinational corporation over one of the poorest countries on earth, and the people who were our staunchest allies in World War II, something's wrong. When the Foreign Affairs Minister orders ASIO to do those things, and then later takes a job on the board of Woodside who was at their advantage, something's wrong. Every year we make a presentation to the Spirit of Eureka Award to someone who's made a significant contribution in the fight for a just and fair Australia. And I'm very pleased to present this year's award to Bernard Collaery. Over to you, Bernard.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm honoured and privileged. First, I speak to you from, of course, the land of the Ngunnawal. The Ngunnawal land is the centre of our nation, allegedly. For the last 30 or 40 years, I've been the honorary lawyer for Winunga Nimini Jarina on the Ngunnawal lands. And in recent years, even in our national capital, we've had hard-fought, unjust results from deaths in custody inquiries. So the whole issue permeates our whole land, including the land of the Ngunnawal, and I've known, because I'm that old now, quite a few of the great elders of Winunga and the nearby Wiradjuri. Yes, Derek and Kevin, I'm facing jail, and so is a very brave person who can't show his face, witness Cain. And I've been asking myself, you can imagine, for the last 2 years while they play with us and taunt us, we've had 42 court appearances so far, how I got there. And when you were talking, Christy, I just remembered growing up below the mining pits on the escarpment in the Illawarra at Corrimal. And when the mines rescue sirens went, well, the kids, a lot of the kids at school, dads were up in the pits. The nuns, I was at a convent school, I'm proud to say MacKillop nuns, the nuns would have us down on our knees for praying for everyone. And a week or so later at the funerals, you'd hear about bad pit props. Like in those days, they were wooden props. And so the local priest would rail about these rich people who supplied inferior pit props, the mine owners and so on and so forth. So, Christy, I grew up in the centre of mid-20th century struggle by workers for justice. And there's been some great ironies. I've had help from the CFMEU over the years with cases like deaths in custody and youngsters being killed on their second day on the job and things like that. But, and I was listening to Charlie Joyce, and I was thinking how keen I used to be. What it is to be a wide sweeping youthful vision. And I thought it was great. And, but I'm just reminded of how far we've got to go. The other thing, you know, Kevin, that hit me about 5 minutes ago while I was listening to Christy was my partner put in front of me the Spirit of Eureka. And I realised, you know, my chambers was raided, all our case documents seized, and I was at The Hague that day waiting to present a case for East Timor. And you know what day that was? And I just remembered because I put the news on. It was the 150th anniversary of the 3rd of December, 1853. It was that day you were all in Ballarat or somewhere, Bendigo. You were all out at Lambing Flat celebrating how far we've gone. Well, I remember sitting at The Hague and thinking, yeah, how far have we gone? The bastards are in my office, raiding it right now, and they're waiting to arrest me when I return. So that was the 3rd of December, 2000. Anyway, we won't go into that. So look, Charlie Joyce, I want to say to you, mate, the biggest problem, the root crisis, we've got a lot of crises, but the root crisis is we've moved away from rule of law in this country. We managed to get a lot of it in the 19th century, the 20th century. We've gone backwards in rule of law. I've been a lawyer, attorney general. I'm not prone to make sweeping statements, but rule of law is under threat in our country. It's under threat. It's under threat, as Alison said. Did she say there's been 18 pieces of legislation if you could read the envelope they've given themselves, that is, both Labor and Liberal governments, the envelopes they've given themselves to run you by algorithm, to rule by algorithm, to rule by robo-debt recovery. It'll be something else next. They've given themselves such a wide envelope that we need to consider whether there's a real class movement happening. That is, the Eureka spirit was against the colonial authority, authoritarianism. Are we returning to authoritarianism? How many of us have sons and daughters who've joined police forces? There must be a lot of us. I haven't got any, but we must. And where are they being led? How are they being led? And so you'd like me to talk about fighting for justice? Well, it didn't come just over East Timor. I've been at it for a few years, as some of you know. But the refusal of this coalition government to accept responsibility for its actions affecting the East Timorese over all the years, partly in some of those years, Labor governments included, there's no different. Kevin Rudd did the national apology. We owe the East Timorese, given our being accessories in their invasion with Indonesia, and you know, they lost up 200,000 people. They lost about 40,000 after the Australians withdrew in World War II. The Japanese reprisals were awful. We've got a debt of honour to them. Timor's on our conscience. We owe them a national apology. I'll still be arguing that, even if it's from jail. We owe those people a huge apology, and we've got to do it. And we're not a good country until we do it.
Yeah.
I think that pragmatism. I mean, I was shattered when no one from Labor, well, some heroes did, but none of the party machine came out to help witness K, has come out to help witness K and I. I mean, you know, my hometown has, and if only you knew where this veteran hero comes from, his town would be out at the barricades too for him. But we can't say it because, you know, like his family, his kids would be at risk, because there are some very nasty people out there, and they might want to get at him. So it'll be good, Christy, if we could get some backbone back into the show, the backbone that I used to see as a kid in Wollongong at school. You know, when the pit props weren't good, they came out and they picketed and they barricaded the pits, and it stopped until, you know, the bad loads of props were taken away, and so on and so forth. I got to tell you though, one year I worked at the steelworks when I was at uni. On my second day for that 3-month job, we went out on the grass. And it was solidarity in those days. And so I spent 2 of my 3 precious months to get some money for uni out on the grass, but I stayed with the blokes. And that's if I look back across when I think, how did I get here? How am I facing jail? Why am I going to go to trial in my own court next to the dock I've spent a lot of my career in? I don't know. I think we've got to get some fighting backbone back in the country and back in our leaders. Why did I get here? Well, when I was 22, I was on a scholarship to uni. It was you'd call it a veteran scholarship now, but in those days, REPAT gave us children of servicemen who'd been killed in the war opportunity to get scholarships to uni. And there was only one uni in New South Wales, Sydney. And the year I went up to uni, only 9 of us from the whole Illawarra, the whole South Coast, only 9 of us got to uni. And so I got a scholarship. And so they had files on us. And so when I was in second or third year, they contacted me and said, well, we want to train you to serve your country like your dad. And I said, well, I'm not finished uni yet. But anyway, so I ended up being trained, and I was trained towards the end. I did some training with one of Australia's special agencies, and one of the blokes training us was an ex-commando, and he told us all about the struggle in Timor in World War II. I didn't know where Timor Island was. I was 22, and I was like breathless with all of the story of the bravery of those Timorese who helped our soldiers. The worst thing that happened to them, their boots fell apart, and they were trying to build a radio to let Melbourne HQ know they were still alive and in good order up in the mountains fighting the Japanese. They needed boots above all, and they needed ammunition. And I mean, this is 20 odd years only after the war, because I'm 76. And I'll always remember that bloke telling us how the Timorese sacrificed themselves. And that was the only part of Southeast Asia, he always told us, where the population itself, the whole population, rose up and assisted them. Elsewhere, you know, the white man was the colonial, and they were largely given away, but not in Timor with their Portuguese priests and all the rest. So we owed them a debt. Go full circle, and then when Whitlam did the deal with Suharto, I was profoundly disgusted and shocked, and so that led me into helping the Timorese. So that's where it starts, and then when Shanana got released from his jail cell, the leader, I went up and joined him, of course, and I worked with him, and I couldn't get over meeting a man who'd spent 9 years in a cell, and he's got a bad sense of humour. The other day he joked about, well, we come full circle, mate. You're going to learn firsthand how that is. But the reality is we've got to keep up this Australian drive for justice and human rights. It's what those blokes on Lambing Flat were working for, and it's what you know, the great pioneering women too in this country, you know, who they fought for. But I was just, you know, I'm very impressed that you've come forward to give me this award. Not a lot of people at this stage want to know you. That's the situation in our country. There's a authoritarianism that has got a lot of public servants in this public service national capital a bit intimidated. My law practice is practically disintegrated. I mean, people don't want to be seen coming in my door, and I can understand it in a way. They've got to feed their kids, and there's vindictiveness and well, the pursuit of witness Cain and myself is pure vengeance. And the reality is either they put witness Cain and I in jail, or they'll have to put John Howard and Alexander Downer to trial. And they're taking the easy option at this stage. But, you know, when and if Cain and I are acquitted, hopefully there'll be a move. But if they get their secret court, well, and they've got it, and we're appealing it in February, it's going to the Court of Appeal, but at the moment, the main issue, which because of that terrorist order on me now, ironically, I can't even refer to what happened in Dili, not allowed to, and I'm not allowed to, you're not allowed to hear my evidence, and it's going to be a secret court. You know, there was a secret week's hearing recently when they let all the leaders of the Secret Service in to give evidence. Some of them didn't look too keen. It reminded me of some Russian show trials. But anyway, you know, before the court started, the workmen got up and put tape over the CCTV, and they've got their own Secret Service recorder there. So it's not the court transcription service. They cut the cameras off. This was like, this was out of another world. I was just sitting there thinking about where our country's going. Why is it that my evidence, my advice to witness K that there had been unlawful activity, that is, a breach of Commonwealth federal, our laws were breached in what happened, which I can't talk about. I've spent 2 years doing that legal research, and Timor was going to win in The Hague. They took K's passport, so he couldn't give evidence if he wanted to. He was going, and I can't talk about it. But what we're dealing with is a massive problem in our country about rule of law. So, Charlie, Joyce, I want you to know, mate, you need freedom at the barricades. You want to devote your energies to finding justice. You better be aware it's getting harder and harder. It's getting harder and harder right across the board, not just for the unions. It's getting harder for lawyers in my profession. It's getting harder generally out there to fight for justice because they've got so many powers now. They know almost what you're thinking, right? And the level of surveillance and the interference with our rights, the manner in which they track us now, we can't get a passport unless we give our biodata, and, you know, with their mates around the world, they can track us everywhere we go. You know, how many places can you have just a quiet meeting that won't necessarily be recorded? The last murder trial I did, we found at the end of the day, there was CCTV for almost the whole night in this shopping centre. There was CCTV of everything, and nearly everything, which was amazing. When the police were put to it, they were able to pattern the movement of this young couple everywhere. And what's to stop them doing it for us right now this afternoon? I mean, I guess it's going down because it's public that I'm speaking. I'm quite sure they're listening to this, seeing if they get any more against us. So I speak to you as a person under threat and under a circumstance that I hadn't anticipated. Been to the barricades often enough over the years with the Timorese, and it's important that we support Witness K. He's a bloke who can't get a voice and will be sentenced in secret. I can't say more, but this award lifts my spirits at least, and means that there's some strength out there that's going to support the issues. I've got to say to you, Christy, that quite a few sort of union people I know, I'm not going into any further details, have said to me that Witness K and I should ask the union movements for some help. Albanese went out a few weeks ago and said that what happened in Delhi was all wrong. That's all he said. Well, you know, anyone can say that. When you get caught, it's all wrong. He didn't say anything for Witness K or me. It wasn't anything. And I think Luke Gosling, ex-commando and an ex-soldier and his ALP Darwin, came out a few days ago. It was a good statement, but once again, it didn't commit itself anywhere. So the Labor Party, except for Graham Perrott and a few fantastic members of the federal parliament, I'm just talking about federal parliament because you know Steve Bracks has been great and all that, but the federal parliamentary Labor Party is missing in action on an issue that goes to the roots of rule of law. If they can put lawyers to trial for acting in good faith, giving advice to an approved client, you know, he's no idle whistleblower, he's been approved, he's come to me, I've done the research and I've advised him that what he's told me about represents unlawful activity by government ministers, and what can be done about that. And he's got a letter in writing from the Inspector General saying he can take private legal action. He takes legal action, and they fall all over us. And instead of this, and the police, the federal police, and this special office they've got, it's called Special Reference Office in the Commissioner's office. Doesn't it? Sounds a bit like J. Edgar Hoover, doesn't it? He had a Special Reference Office too. Special Reference Office police, instead of getting information from Cain and charging people, I can't name, charge us. That's the country we've got. And we're not alone. There is a fear in the federal bureaucracy at the moment about the powers, and they're somehow or other, the government is supported by one or two very senior zealots who are determined to keep public servants quiet. And the government is entitled to confidentiality, but it's not entitled to cover up law breaking. And why did it take so many months for the robo-debt disgrace to come out? And it was the public sector union that had a big hand in supporting those who wanted to come out and say how the robo-debt thing was scandalous. But you talk about Russian interference in the 2016 election in the United States. What about here, when just very large sums of money were given to in marginal electorates to clearly influence voting? I mean, that's our country. So, Derek, thanks, and Kevin, thank you very much for this award. I'm deeply honoured. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Bernard. We salute you for your courageous work. You truly are a people's hero. That's why we are giving you the award this year. Thanks to our speakers for such an extensive coverage of issues. Plenty of facts and evidence have been presented today. There is so much to think about and act on. These types of online forums are so necessary and important because much of this kind of analysis is missing from our media. This is not surprising because, in the main, Australia's media is so pro-multinational corporations, pro-mining fossil fuel, pro-nuclear, pro-US war of aggressions, pro-privatisation, anti-worker, anti-democratic rights, and the list goes on. The Australian people are overwhelmingly bombarded with super-saturated neoliberal crap. However, even though Australia is a vassal state run by servile politicians in the service of the US, we can campaign successfully and win over public opinion. It has been done before. There are plenty of examples. The Collaery penal power struggle of 1969, the Your Rights at Work campaign of 2007, the Carlton United Workers' Industrial Struggle, the recent long fight by the ExxonMobil workers, the Vietnam Moratorium campaign of the 1970s, the anti-uranium mining and anti-nuclear movements of the 1980s, also the anti-nuclear war campaign of the 1980s, and the climate emergency rallies by our youth this decade demonstrate it can be done. We have in Australia to win back from imperialism. Now over to the viewers' questions. If you haven't already, you can still enter your question for this Q&A session in the chat column and please press enter for your question to reach us. Questions via Facebook will also be collected. We'll only take one question from each viewer. If we do have time, we'll invite viewers to send in a second question. Remember, we only have 20 minutes for Q&A, maybe a little less. Okay, right. The first question is for Alison and Bernard. Great material, clearly and succinctly explained, Alison. Thanks. Please also comment on who the officers are not being held for the alleged war crimes. Surely they have a command responsibility, putting aside that some, at least of them, would have known what was going on. If they did not, they should be court-martialed at least. Okay, Alison or Bernard?
Well, Alison can't take the question, Derek. So, look, okay. There's a very significant issue. Well, I've got to be straight out here. I've been honorary solicitor for the Australian Bravery Association for quite a few years, and I've been involved in some of this. Because of high-tech issues, our troops, our special force troops, are equipped with radios that radio back to base automatically. And if a radio goes mute, it's known. And those in command are in real-time contact. That hasn't come out in the media. And those are bases that secure the real-time communications would have time logs, and there'll be records of who was present in command rooms. Presumably, in the Australian Army tradition, the officers in charge are following events if they're not in the field themselves. So there's a big issue there that hasn't been mentioned. There's another issue I would raise in answer to that question briefly, and that is the great risk this misconduct has caused now. I know, Alison, we don't want any further wars. If we're ever forced into anything else, in a circumstance where anyone we're fighting recalls that the Australian maverick elements executed prisoners, how are our prisoners going to be treated? How are our prisoners going to be treated? That hasn't come up in the media yet either. No. And that's a highly significant one for anyone. I've got a nephew in the armed forces, and I've got another nephew as well. I've got two nephews in the armed forces. So how would they be treated as prisoners? And how would non-government civilians, Australians, be treated now in Muslim Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places? So that's not been mentioned. But if you were the parent, uncle of a serving soldier, you will think that. And they'll give us no quarter. If you want my private view, they'll give us no quarter now. And that's why our operation should have been rigidly controlled. There must have been silences. There must have been indications at command level that something was going wrong. That's all I could say.
Okay, the next question is for you, Christy. For a long while, union leaders have used their position to enter political parties instead of standing up for their union members. Do you think this is why membership has dropped off?
Thanks for that. I think one of the reasons is that is why union membership was dropped off, because they've seen leaders go from the union movement as a stepping stone into politics, and when they've got there, they forgot where they've come from. I've seen it many times on many occasions, and that's why I believe our attitude to politicians, whatever they are, ALP, Greens, whatever they are, we see it that if they are going to go into politics and the union movement does put them up, then they have to sign a Magna Carta in respect to union agreements, you know, privatisation, casualisation, workers' rights, permanency, fining and suing of working class people and their union, all kinds of things, you know, bringing things back into the national arena, and obviously the unemployed and people that really need looking after. I did hear JobKeeper mentioned before. You'll see it come out in the press what Cube have been doing, who own Patrick's. Cube applied for JobKeeper and was successful in millions and millions of dollars, then give all these CEOs, and this is the type of stuff you get, then they give all these CEOs millions of dollars in bonuses and have them working and use the JobKeeper to fund them bonuses. It's ridiculous. But to answer your question, no, I think it's a good question. And yet, certainly, a lot of union officials, and I could name plenty. Look at Martin Ferguson. You know, I don't even have to say anything about him. Look at Gary Gray over here. Look at where they go. They go on the boards of Woodside, Shell, BHP, Rio Tinto, all in the offshore oil and gas, millions and millions of dollars. Look at the ex-premier in Queensland, where she went to the banks. I mean, you know, really speaking, we have to change our way and our journey as we go through this. Otherwise, we're going to fall in to being non-effective. And at the moment, there's a lot of unions that is non-effective.
Thanks, Christy. Now, we've got two related questions for all the panellists. How do we educate the general public? The media has become so right-wing, and we need to fight harder for justice. How do we engage the wider community? We'll start with you, Charlie.
That's a really, really important question. I think media's changed. I think we can all agree that, and especially for the younger generations, the reliance on traditional media is really, you know, on newspapers and TV and that sort of thing has been very much traded for social media. And I think that is one way in which there has actually been a dissemination of more radical news perspectives and these sorts of things, if you know where to find them. But also the danger of these platforms is that they're owned by Silicon Valley tech billionaires that have really extensive ties a lot of the time to the US government. You've seen the banning of various Venezuelan and Bolivian union-run news sites and journalists from Twitter. Facebook has put, and you know, say what you want about the Chinese government, but they've put big warnings next to every Chinese government Facebook account saying this is a Facebook account funded and run by the Chinese government, but nothing for American ones. So I don't think you can really trust these platforms to be the means in which we're disseminating out exclusively. Although I do think that we need to, as a progressive movement, as a union movement, these sorts of things get a lot better and a lot slicker at communications when it comes to that sort of thing. I don't know. I think it really the dirty work needs to be done of reconstructing an alternative media in this country. There needs to just be money put into it. There needs to be time and dedication of good people, and there are good people out there put into it. There's some really good work being done at the moment through the American magazine Jacobin. They've just employed over about 6 months ago an Australian editor that has been putting out some really, really good stuff, and that's been quite good in getting out some Australian perspectives from a left-wing, from a progressive perspective on various stuff. But that's I think they have circulation of around 70 to 100,000, which is a lot better than it was. But at the end of the day, you know, we've got a country of 24 million people and these sorts of things. There's also alternative radio like Radio 3CR and these sorts of things. But I think, again, you know, these things are small scale. They're, whether it be Jacobin or 3CR or the various independent newspapers out there, they're, the union movement particularly, but also lots of other organisations on the more progressive side of politics have a lot of money at the moment, and a lot of it's just being sat on. And I think if there was real resources put into constructing alternative media in this country, it could go a long way into breaking the monopoly that the centre-right and far-right wing media has over the national discussion.
Thanks, Charlie. Bernard or Christy, would you like to comment on those two questions? Bernard?
Christy, you go there first.
Christy?
Well, in respect to the social media can be a good avenue for workers to get their point across. But you get a lot of trolls in that and a lot of debates. I think the union movement has been divided in the ACTU for a long time. I think we've lost our way to the extent that we should be inclusive of bringing all the delegates around Australia together, not all the workers, and then they can go back to the workforce and explain different workforces in different areas and explain what's going on. There is certainly a gap or a divide between a meeting of the ACTU national secretaries and a meeting at the TLC, which shouldn't happen, but there is. For want of a better word, we need to get more organised from the bottom up. And when we are at the top, we should relay our views, whether people like hearing it or not, in the forums back to workers on the ground, so then they can have that debate. And what comes out of debate is obviously will be circulated in the main news if it's strong enough. I mean, can you imagine, just for example, you get 10,000 delegates in Melbourne come together for a debate on how we're going to go forward and who we're going to support, and, you know, pick 2 or 3 issues that fundamentally the union movement could get behind instead of fighting with each other. It could work. So, in respect to social media, you know, it's a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. The way forward, we're never going to stop Murdoch and others, Packer and others, and many more. We've got to get out there and start educating the young delegates and organisers in the movements to step up and have a go. I mean, I'm just looking around on this forum here, the ones I can see. How many young ones are there? That's the first thing I looked. I know Kevin is. Yeah, and there's a few others, Alan is saying it as well, but it's a fact, isn't it? You know.
They're on social media, Christy. They're on Facebook.
Are they? Okay. Well, yeah, well, I'd like to think, I've been to meetings when we have our AGMs and we'll get 500 there, and I'd say 499 are over 50. So all I'm saying is there's room to articulate and come back to the younger men and women who are good on social media, don't get me wrong, but who need to understand where their wages and conditions come from. Industrial manslaughter, we've had a campaign for the last, started in Queensland, we've been all around the country with it. We started to harmonise that. What were they doing over here? They were there. If we hadn't said quite clearly that we'd put a picket line on the Parliament House for every day they didn't act the legislation, it wouldn't have went out. It wouldn't have got through. So we've got no apologies to make for the stuff we do, but I think it can be done better, and it's going to be very difficult to get our point across in the media, no matter what we do, because it's run by the right-wing press.
Thanks, Christy. Bernard, do you want to comment?
Well, look, yes, I can see what Christy's saying, but from, you know, I'm in this bubble up here, but I do travel the country when it's not COVID. The younger generation, Charlie Joyce's generation, dealing and sharing information on social media. And if the message that we've got, if the people our age who come to the demonstrations outside the court, in my case, there are a few young people involved, it's because they don't even know this is happening. They don't even know who Witness K is. Just about everyone in my generation, the one below me know, but the kids don't know. And I think, you know, there's a everyday crikey.com give a pithy window on what's going on in politics nationally and at state level. But how that doesn't go into social media. Crikey is, you know, barely functions economically, financially, I assume. You know, it strikes me. I think that It's education, fundamentally, we all agree with that. But education is no longer in the schools in a political sense, and perhaps nor should it be. So is it Charlie Joyce's generation who can work the levers? Is it Charlie, before we get to Bolivia, would it be better that we get onto our own social media platforms here and let those platforms know about Bolivia and about Australia and some parallels with dictatorships? That would trigger their interest. Got to get them interested. When I go around the some of the plush suburbs of Canberra and Sydney and Melbourne, there are tradies utes in the driveways. There are. And they can afford to subscribe to wider media if it was available and digestible for them. And so really, the educators have a responsibility. I'm not talking about just teachers, the educators, the unions, certainly the unions, the legal profession, in my case. You know, I've got Solidarity, the Law Council and all the rest is supporting me. But last Christmas, I went to a lunch, just been in court. There were 12 young lawyers sitting at the table, 12. I brought my clerk because she never gets out and we feel a bit embattled. And not one of those young lawyers knew about my case. Not one of them, not a single one of them. So it's right across the board. It's a generational thing. And how come rule of law, human rights and justice is generational at the moment? That's what worries me. Because they're the ones who'll be called up for the next war these neoliberals create. And as Alison said, how do the normal troops know what's going on? That's my comment, Derek.
Thank you, Bennett. The next one is for you, Charlie. Are there more young people working with you?
Yeah, I think I answered very briefly in the chat, but yeah, no, there's a lot of really good people around the country at the moment. There's some good stuff coming out of various student movements around the place, where there's some, I don't know if you saw, there's some really good stuff at the University of Sydney, strong activists going up against both the university and against police powers and these sorts of things. There's in a few, just like basing on my own experience in Victoria, there's some a really amazing generation of people that have come through the climate movement and the school strike for climates. You know, kids that have by the age of 16 have already undertaken strike action and gone out in the streets with 100,000 of their fellow like-minded people. It's amazing. I was sort of on the a bit 1 or 2 years too old for that, but yeah, it's amazing the different consciousness of those who are in first year uni versus those who are in third year uni. Just like even that like 1 year change has been quite remarkable. Yeah, look, I don't know. I think that there are real generational gaps between an event like this and the sort of way more youth-focused things. My experience has been that the organisations of activists or progressive or these sorts of things are either like 19 and 20-year-olds or 50s, 60s plus. And obviously there's people in the middle have families and that sort of thing, but there's a lot of really keen, really inexperienced people, and there's a lot of people that have a lot of experience, but there's not necessarily the connections there, perhaps a result of the complete routing of the left in the 90s and 2000s and the lack of a middle generation there to carry, and lack of institutions as well. So yeah, but no, there's a lot of good people, and I think we just need to get organised. But there's the consciousness of everyone, I think, is developing in similar ways. People are looking at things like the experience of COVID and the pandemic and everything like that, and international affairs in similar ways. But I agree with Bernard that there's a real difference in understanding of especially issues to do with laws and to do with surveillance and these sorts of things. And frankly, it's because we've never known a world without it. You know, the post 9/11, I've lived the vast majority of my life post 9/11, post or the increased surveillance and everything like that, and post-war on terror. You know, I've had 2 years of my life where Australia hasn't been in Afghanistan. Yeah, we just it's just normal, and so there's you know, it becomes background noise. It becomes, and you focus on the things that you feel are tangible to you, I guess, which is the fact that there's, you know, more than a dozen 45-degree days every summer these days, and you can't leave Melbourne without your campsite burning down, or, you know, these sorts of things. And so the climate movement, and then also the young workers movement, everyone's experiencing casualisation and everything like that. And there's a lot of people focusing and rightly angry on that, but on issues to do with surveillance and authoritarianism in a more subverted way, it's we don't know anything without it, and so it's an unknown what another world, if it could be.
Thanks, Charlie. The next question is for you, Bernard. What has our society become? We punish the innocent and applaud the corrupt.
Well, we've given, just as Charlie said, and as Alison said, we've given the rulers the power to push silence on those who protest. It's not a matter of tear gas anymore. It's in a very sophisticated and incredible manner. Laws have been passed that make it an offence for lawyers to provide assistance. There's a web of laws now that have given power to some zealots. You know, in a sort of racist way, we talk about zealots in other countries. We've got them now in our country. They are behind some of the politicians you see every day, every night on TV. I know them. The laws of defamation prevent me identifying them. But there are zealots determined to use every measure possible to inhibit criticism. They're unelected, they've got an agenda, they meet, they have their own meetings, they're very senior zealots, they have an agenda. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I'm sick of those, I've seen them for years and years and years falling over, but there are identified, slightly wacko zealots in incredible positions of power at the moment in Canberra. And some of the politicians are just lambs to the slaughter for the agenda, for the agendas they have. And the zealots do latch onto some susceptible people who have very pronounced wrong views. And well, you know, you've got you can go through TV programs you watch and decide where the susceptible are. I think the mishandling of our relationship with China over the last 15 years shows how incompetent our foreign policy has been. For 15, 20 years, everyone who could took a free trip to China, a study tour, there was funding and all the rest. And suddenly when they're caught out, actually, the politicians, they bring in foreign interference laws that impact us who've had nothing to do with China, but now we've got foreign interference laws that make it difficult for any lawyer now to see a public servant who wants to give them just a simple email, any document, how many paper clips are being ordered this month. The new laws, the criminal code laws and foreign interference laws have effectively stopped people coming in our doors who could before, because they're criminalising my profession as well. So it's a major challenge to society. And I think Duncan talked about how could you get the tradies who, you know, are busy doing, you know, living well and, you know, all strength to them, I suppose. How do you get them interested? Well, we've got to, they or their children have got to know where the country's going and what's happening to us.
Thank you, Bernard. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our Q&A time, and time is moving on. To conclude this forum, Spirit of Eureka invites viewers to unmute their mics to join in the reciting of their famous Eureka oath. We'll put up the oath on the screen share for viewers to see. I call on Kevin once again to lead the reciting of the oath. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, everyone. And we hope you have been inspired to do a bit more to make this a decent country to live. Thanks very much for our speakers today, for your fantastic contributions. And we want to help and support the people who are suffering because of that. Can you repeat after me? Turn on your microphones, unmute your microphones and turn your camera. Hands in the air. We swear by the Southern Cross.
We swear by the Southern Cross.
To stand truly by each other.
To stand truly by each other.
And fight to defend our rights and liberties.
And fight to defend our rights and liberties.
Thanks very much. And I've seen Margaret Williamson's there. Your descendants were on Bakery Hill. And that was made 166 years ago, right about this time on Bakery Hill, when 10,000 miners stood together.
It's Eureka. Spirit of Eureka.
So it's the time for us now to stand together too. We encourage you to join up with Spirit of Eureka and become a bit more active. And we need to get the news out about what's really happening in here and stop that propaganda which gets pushed on us from the powers, the people who pull the strings of the politicians. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Back to you.
I'm not a member of it. I can't be a member of it.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks to our viewers for listening in on this forum and asking pertinent questions. This Zoom online session has been recorded and will soon be posted on Spirit of Eureka's website and Facebook page. Please encourage your friends and people who you think might support the cause for a democratic, just and independent Australia to view this video. Once again, thanks to our speakers for their excellent presentations. Thanks to all our Spirit of Eureka comrades who planned and helped put together this online forum, especially Pat. 2020 has been a pivotal and trying year for the Australian people, indeed the world's peoples. We hope you have survived this cataclysmic year, and we look forward to uniting with you next year in supporting people's struggles, whether they be in the community or union meetings, strike pickets or protest rallies in 2021. In regards to next year, there are 4 areas that Spirit of Eureka would like to focus on. 1, there is the critical need for a workers' environment campaign. 2 is the protection of workers and union rights. 3, attacks on our democratic rights and civil liberties. 4, Spirit of Eureka is supporting the People's Inquiry organised by IPAN, which is the acronym for the Independent and Peaceful Australia Network. If you would like to get in contact with Spirit of Eureka, please go to our website's contact page, as you can see on the screen. The website address is www.spiritofeureka.org. So we'll close this forum now. Thank you for joining us. Maintain the struggle for a democratic, just and independent Australia. Always in unity and solidarity. Stay safe and keep well.
Yeah, thanks. Cheers.